I am your host, Jason Miles, and this is Revolution Podcast. This is the audio edition of our Saturday free show. We call it the free show because we try. If you've been listening to this show for a while, you know I have been trying to stop at an hour. And then we go into the patron-only champagne room and have a behind-the-paywall conversation where we curse a lot more. And I even dropped a freestyle. Freestyle battle rap. That was fun. But the Saturday free show, we go for as long as we feel we need to. And this show could have went a little longer, to be honest. There was really no lulls in it. We were talking with professor and historian Harun Yilmaz. We found out a few interesting things in the chat that we said out loud that as people were trying to find Haroon on the on internet, there's another Harun Yilmaz that's a weightlifter. If you see Haroon, even from the shoulders up, not a weightlifter. Not trying to be mean, just not a weightlifter. That was funny. But we had a long talk about historical context when we look at the situation with Russia and its neighbors. Constantly there's news talking about, is the U.S. and NATO going to back the Ukraine? Is Russia going to invade? We had a conversation about the history of the old Soviet Union, before the Soviet Union. It's before the revolution. Strategically, would it make sense for Russia to even try? What were the benefits in 2014 with their aggression in Ukraine compared to now? Is the Ukraine's current president a CIA puppet? Is this all a U.S. plot? How can it be with so many Western business interests that kind of don't want to see regime change? They don't want to see any conflict. They want to keep things exactly the way they are. So an interesting conversation. If you like what you're hearing and you would like to support, you have the means, feel so inclined, become a patron. Patreon.com/BitterLakePresents. Wherever you are listening to the show, there's links in the description. If you'd like to see this live and participate in the chat, Tuesday through Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific time, we go live on YouTube.com/This is Revolution Podcast. And the free show Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Early. Enjoy the conversation. Leave a comment if you disagree with the discussion. Thank you very much, and I am out. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles. If you are new to the channel, welcome. For those of you returning, thank you so much for coming back to check out another educational episode of This is Revolution Podcast, Saturday free show. If you are new and you haven't done it already, please hit the like and subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the bell so you are notified as we are adding new programming constantly to the channel. And today we're going to be talking about Russia, and what's going on with the Ukraine. But before I get into what we're going to be talking about, let's introduce our host. You know him as the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Robert. Oh, Jesus.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles, Night of the Comet.
That is one of my favorite movies from the 80s. You remember Halley's Comet?
Yes.
Do you remember all the hubbub around Halley's Comet? Because it comes every 80 or 91 years or whatever. This movie was made kind of in reaction to all the nonsense that was going around Halley's Comet. It's a zombie movie that's very, very pro-U.S. occupation of Central America. So
I feel enriched that you shared that with me.
Oh yeah, no, you should check it out. Some Cold War propaganda hiding in a horror film.
I'm working through the documentary about Bill Cosby.
I watched part 1 last night, and I will save all comments for off air and then the show we did.
Were you traumatized?
I have some opinions.
Okay. We'll talk about it then.
Yeah, it's definitely an off-air conversation. Speaking of off-air conversations, let me bring in the other black guy. He's my co-host in the new sports show, Beyond the Red Zone, that we just launched on Monday. He's, right now, every black person's favorite person to bring on their show to talk about what we should do with the Ukraine. He is foreign policy expert. Marcus of the Left Flank Vets.
Don't say foreign policy expert. Okay, that's too weighted, way too weighted. So I start ranting about how anyone's saying, well, what are we gonna do about Putin? You know, they're just puppets of the military industrial complex. They hit my computer with the Havana syndrome gun. You know, so if my internet goes out, it's because it's my proximity to the deep state, to the military industrial complex, and their influence. So yeah, it's been going on. But yeah, no Miki Khan.
Do they make you wear your old military uniform before you go on?
Yeah, I mean, I always have it pressed and hanging up. You know, no. Like.
Oh shit. And rejoining us as he is dealing with a lot in the UK, and I'm extremely happy to have our Kurdish brother back with us. He's everybody's favorite hoodlum from Hull. He is Mean Gene Bajlan.
Greetings, everybody. Greetings, chat. Greetings, Pascal. Greetings, Jason. And greetings, Marcus. Comet sighted, -2 stability. Those in the chat who know what that means, you know what it means. It's code. But yeah, exciting show today. We're going to be hitting up Russia. We're going to be hitting up the juice box that is Russia. And I think Marcus really needs to start going on progressive podcasts wearing his military uniform, because I think that would be super. So cut his hair short, get his military uniform on, and sit there all uptight. So I think that would lend you credibility.
And that, yeah. And there was a time where you could play. I played the card, but no longer. All right, I still get my 10% with the hair at Applebee's. So they don't have to wear the uniform.
Do you go around getting military discounts everywhere you go?
I mean, in places where I deem, it very necessary just for cost savings purposes, the weed store, mainly.
You're going to get mad at me for this?
Golden Corral is an important place to get your military discount.
Yeah, well, if you just got to make sure you stay away from the steak line. That's
Hey, Marcus. So when I worked in the Gulf of Mexico, you have to get a merchant mariner's document. And so I would use that as my military.
Hell yes. No. Hey, I am very much. Yes. Hey, thank you for your service.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like, thank you for your service.
Yes.
I was I cooked for oil field workers.
And
next time my dad's in the U.S., I should try and convince him to get his ID from when he did his national service in the Iraqi army in the 70s. So
honestly,
you said military discount. You didn't say which military.
But also, there's actually a few stories going around where people in the Space Force are upset because people don't believe them when they ask for their veterans discount. So
baby, I'm in the goddamn Space Force.
If you're gonna lie, just don't use Space Force, but steal the valor, get your 10% off, go for it.
Hey, people are joking like, thank you for your service, but seriously, that shit got me out of tickets when I was driving back home from Louisiana.
Play the card.
Oh, I played the shit out of it. They're like, oh, you work in the Gulf? I was like, yeah, tough work out there in the Gulf.
Yes, sir, I do.
It's hard sometimes.
A lot of good men out there.
There's a lot of good men out there. Pascal, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. Feeling kind of mellow.
Wait, somebody asked in the chat, what's the Branson of England? There's a lot of Bransons in England, but I would say Skegness is the Branson of England.
I think you just made up a word.
Skegness?
Yeah, Skegness.
This sounds like a bad ska band.
What the fuck is got into Pascal?
Skegness? Skegness sounds like a disease you have after sex with a prostitute. What the hell is that?
That's actually a likely scenario. Some kind of STD certainly could come with you out of Skegness. It's one of the places my brother goes wrestling. They do wrestling tours, and they go to Skegness. It's a holiday resort on the beach in Britain.
Gene. So people think that you have short hair, and someone responded, "That's not short hair. That's a ponytail."
I thought it was short hair at first too.
I told you the only people his age with ponytails are porn directors.
Can we get a turn? Can we get a?
I can live with that. I can live with that.
Can we get a profile? Gee, can we get a turn to the? Oh, wow. Yes.
Are you going to sprinkle the salt?
You got like a little fade on the sides and the
and I got the haircut thanks to racial capitalist solidarity. I went to a Kurdish barber in Anlaby, and we had a little chit chat. It was fun.
Nice.
Don't you call me Rash? So Dusty's talking. That's
wow.
That's it. So you said you look like the Vouch?
The Vouch looks like me.
There you go. Keep it real. It's pretty funny. That's not a haircut. That's a ponytail.
Well, my father didn't like it. He was like, go get a haircut. You look like a tramp. I'm like, okay, I'll go get a haircut. And I came back. He goes, you look like a hoodlum. He used the word hoodlum. Yeah. Oh no, he said you look like a hooligan.
Oh, that's even worse. Aren't those the guys that beat people up during soccer games?
They are.
Don't they usually beat black people up during soccer games?
It depends on the football team.
That wasn't the answer we were looking for. You were supposed to say, oh no, there's no racial tensions in merry old England.
the truth, though. It's the
Didn't we
truth.
just have a problem with the queen and the daughter, man? She's like, I don't want that black baby in my family. No, he will not be royalty.
You have
Yeah.
all the issues with the conservative front bench. They're all Dassies. Well, there's not all of them. There's a bunch of Dassies. So we've solved racism in Britain. We have a bunch of people who Idi Amin kicked out their parents, and now they work for the Conservative Party.
So the Indo-Pakistani community in England has merged with the reactionary right on the political level.
No,
Now-
I think there's a tendency amongst, and this is obviously a generalization. I think you could probably say that Afro-Indians lean conservative in Britain.
Someone says, born sinner, cold world. Gene looks like a middle-aged dad who carries a handgun to intimidate his daughter's boyfriend and listens to Joe Rogan.
That's what I'm going for.
Oh yeah.
Well, you fucking nailed it. God damn. Well, I want before we actually start talking about real shit, and I'm so sorry, Haroon. I hope you're having a little bit of fun here in the virtual green room. I can see Haroon right now just shaking his head. I wanted to send this to you, and I don't know why I didn't send it to you, and I apologize for that. I think I was just leaving you alone because I know you're just so busy with family shit. There was a riot in a Golden Corral, and they were throwing chairs, all because someone asked for a medium rare steak and some horrible man asked for a well-done steak.
Ooh.
So of course, yeah, who wants to eat beef jerky? So the guy that ordered the rare steak, of course, got it first, right? Doesn't take that long.
Right.
But he had ordered after the well-done man. Well-done man doesn't understand how meat is cooked, and a fight happened. They were throwing tables, Gene, at each other.
How dare they desecrate the holy sanctuary that is Golden Corral?
It was a nightmare.
What is American society coming to when you can't even have civilized behavior in a Golden Corral?
If you would have watched it, I know a tear would have went down your cheek as you saw the fucking chocolate.
I don't think I could watch it. The destruction of a Golden Corral.
I've never seen anything like that in my life. I'm from the inner city where this shit happens quite often. I've seen all kinds of shit at McDonald's and Jack in the Box in downtown San Francisco. I've never seen anyone pick up actual furniture like that and throw it at other people. Women, pregnant women, it didn't matter.
They were baby
all
seats. The baby,
brutal.
the
They
high
threw
chairs.
everything.
were
Did you
flying.
see it, Marcus? They
Yes.
threw everything. It was nuts. And I was like, I know Gene I know this has to have filtered down to the UK news. And I guess it did not.
I missed it. I've been too busy in the UK to follow Golden Corral updates. Pascal is not impressed. We need to get to the meat.
To the meat of the subject.
Well, Russia's been in the news again over the apparent troops buildup on the Ukrainian border. This is leading to some fiery rhetoric coming out of the U.S. political and media establishment and fears of war. Russia, on the flip side, denies hostile intent and is framing the issue as a reaction to NATO expansion eastwards. The Ukrainian crisis comes hot on the heels of a Russian-led intervention into the Central Asian state of Kazakhstan. Given all this, we here at TIR thought it might be a good idea to discuss some of the broader historical context to recent events with our very special guest. Are you guys ready?
Yes, sir.
Are you sure?
Yes, sir.
He is a historian of the Soviet Union, a lecturer at Queen Mary's in London, and someone who has written specifically on the history of both the Ukraine and Kazakhstan. He is Dr. Harun Yilmaz.
Welcome.
Hi. Thank you very much for the introduction. I have a quick question. I'm not an illiterate person as you introduced me, actually. What's Golden Corral?
Golden Corral is a
Buffet restaurant
that
right.
specializes in chocolate fondue fountains and steaks to order.
I see. Okay. Right.
Buffet. Golden Corral is endemic of all that is wrong with America. Greed, overindulgence. I'm being sarcastic. No, it's
He's
an
actually being very
buffet.
serious.
What did you go
Golden
against?
Corral is also the place.
Huh?
It's
Why
Golden
did you-
Corral
true.
gives you so much meat, Haroon, that depending on where you like, I've walked into some really wicked farts at Golden Corrals. Because people get some wicked meat farts.
I see.
But it is very overindulgent, and they have a steak night that is kind of intense. And that's why Jean likes it.
Well, you know who else likes it? Every Eastern European person who has come to Springfield to visit, and there have been a couple, have said Golden Corral is their favorite restaurant.
You can eat for like $15-20. You can eat so much food
Everything.
that you won't be hungry the next day.
a week's worth of calories.
Yeah, I've
And
done
if
that
you
several
don't-
times.
If you don't have an auntie,
Actually,
with a
we
fucking
should
plastic
stop
bag,
this.
you know,
If Sarah's watching this, she told me specifically, don't talk about Golden Corral.
Does she know about the fight?
I don't think she knows about the fight. We haven't been to Golden Corral since COVID.
Oh, so she misses it.
I don't know if she misses it. I don't think that's the correct
Don't
word
mention
for
it.
it. Just don't mention the Golden Corral.
Because
Someone
Zal,
wrote like Golden Corral is where you go if your money is tight and your expectations are low.
Yes, there you got it. Exactly.
that's pretty much Golden Corral, and you only find them, Haroon, in like the suburbs. They're never in a big city.
And is it like all over America? Like not only in California, not in the East
No,
Coast?
it's a huge chain. Very popular in the Midwest.
Very,
Okay.
very big in the suburbs of the United States. So once you get out of a major metropolitan area, I think that's part of the business model. It has to be so many miles outside of a major city. But it is,
Next time.
yeah. When you
next
come
time
back to
I'm
the
in the
States, we'll
US,
take you to a Golden Corral, and then we'll take you to a good old fashioned racial fight. Big old American racial fight.
I think I don't need the dessert part. I can just eat the main.
Well, let's. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on right now with? I think we have to get some context. Let's begin with Kazakhstan and Central Asia. Can you give us a brief historical outline of Russia's relationship with Kazakhstan?
Sure. For the ones who are not very much familiar with the geography of Kazakhstan, it's in Central Asia between Russia, China, and next to north of Afghanistan, south of Russia, west of China, let's say. So it's right at the center of Eurasian continental mass. So Kazakhs are ethno-linguistically a Turkic people, and they were historically they were pastoral nomads. In one word, they lived like the American Indians. You know, they had their and they constantly traveled from one spot to another. Seasonal, they were moving seasonally up and down in a huge steppe, which is actually the size of Western Europe, right? That's the historic case. They were pastoral nomads, and the today's Kazakhstan, or the Kazakh steppe, was incorporated into the Russian empire in the 18th, 19th centuries, gradually, because it's a big territory. And it was a long story, like chunks of it became part of the empire and then another chunk. And after the revolution, the region became part of the Soviet Union. And another milestone probably in the history of Kazakhstan is in 1932, they experienced an artificial famine, and more than 1 million Kazakhs died. There are discussions, historical discussions about the cause of it, implementation of the central policies, who did what at the local level. But ultimately, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and Stalin, as the head of the party, head of the government, was responsible for this catastrophe. So more than 1 million Kazakhs died in 1.5 years in this artificial famine. And if you consider that the Kazakh population at that time was around 3 million, so half of the population perished. So it was a huge blow, and that's why in the following decades, Kazakhs were a minority in their own land. Up until 1990s, 80s, 90s, that was the case. And there were a lot of forced migrations towards Kazakhstan by the Soviet government, or encourage migrations, internal migrations from other parts of the Soviet Union to Kazakhstan. That's why they couldn't catch up. The birth rate of Kazakhs could not catch up with the immigration of other ethnicities to Kazakhstan after 1932 disaster. And that's why they constantly remained as a minority. But now that's not the case. Many ethnic Russians moved from Kazakhstan to Russia, or Ukrainians. There was a big German minority. They moved to Germany. There are still a lot of different ethnicities: Koreans, Kurds, Georgians, Turks, different ethnicities. Thanks to the Soviet settlement policies, some forced settlement policies, but that's the case. Now they're in majority. Now that they're in majority in their own republic. So most of the Kazakhs became sedentary. They were settled, forcibly settled. Became sedentary after the 1930s. And during the Second World War, a large number of factories and industrial experts along those factories were moved to Kazakhstan. During the German Nazi occupation of the Soviet Union, when the German forces reached the gates of Moscow, Stalingrad, and Leningrad, thousands of production lines, factories, they were dismantled as much as they could, as much as the authorities could at the time, Soviet authorities, and they were moved to Siberia and to Central Asia, to Kazakhstan. And of course, with those factories and production lines, of course, moved workers and technicians, engineers, experts along those together with those factories and production lines. And that was, in a way, the beginning of the industrialization of Kazakh economy. That took off with this wave during the war. So, like the coal mines in Ukraine were lost to Germans for nearly 2 years. They had to exploit find mines, coal mines were open, or existing were extended in Kazakhstan, for instance. So in 1950s, the country witnessed further industrialization, urbanization, and as one of those 15 republics, it became a separate, independent state. That's the last 100, or 150 years of Kazakhstan in a short, in a summary.
So, Harun,
Yes.
could you perhaps tell us then a little bit about how Russia's relationship has evolved in the post-Soviet era? Kazakhstan is now an independent state. How has Russia's relationship been with Kazakhstan? Has it been close? Has Kazakhstan built relations with the West or China? What has been the foreign policy orientation of independent Kazakhstan, and how is it being governed, and who's governing it?
The foreign policy, actually Kazakh foreign policy, to my mind, was a very, they tried to keep a balance between Russia and the West, and later on with China as well, because Russia is historically a big neighbor, a powerful neighbor. I mean, there are thousands of kilometers of land border they have with Russia, like very similar to American-Canadian border. You see, it's a very long border, and there are natural, let's say, cultural ties as well, because at the time of independence, nearly half of the population was Russian or Slavic, let's say, Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, if we take them as a overall Slavic population. Excessive majority also spoke Russian, and still we can say so. I mean, the Russian language is the language of urban, educated population. It's the language of it's the language to reach to, it's not only about just a language, but like, thanks to Russian, you can reach to bigger cultural dimensions, let's say, right? Language perceived and in practice very much so as the language of nomadic shepherd or a villager, a peasant, you see. That's why literature is mostly in Russian, and its culture is produced in the Russian language. Although this doesn't mean that Russian-speaker Kazakhs are not Kazakh patriots, let's say, right? Let's put it in that way. Like, it's just their native tongue is Russian. That's why what I want to say is there are strong cultural relations, and the country was part of Soviet Union, and before that Russian Empire in overall, in total, like 200 years. There's some, they were part of political unity, and there was economic relations, strong economic relations as well. I mean, Kazakh economy, Russian economy, Kazakhs were also, Russia was a big trade partner. So that was the starting point in 1991. And then the Western capital came, Western investment, Western oil and gas companies, big oil and gas companies that you know very well. When they arrived, the new Kazakh administration, Kazakh government, actually ex-communist senior leadership in Kazakhstan, who turned to be the leadership of the new nation state. They reframed themselves, and they cooperated with the Western big corporations from the West, Western big corporations, big Western corporations, and they worked together. So on the one hand, they had a strong, powerful neighbor, Russia, historical neighbor, with historical ties. On the other hand, there were Western investors with new technology, capital, and Kazakhstan needed that capital. Otherwise, oil and gas stays in the depths of the Caspian Sea. you cannot pump it out by using a small pipe or
and siphon it. Is what you're saying, like they do here.
Yeah, exactly. Siphon. So you need technology for that. So there was that cooperation, and there were very open market, like marketization of all sectors of the economy, very radical reforms, as it's called, neoliberal reforms. Everything was privatized. They sold factories. If they couldn't sell, they closed it. There was a big also unemployment as a consequence. 1990s, of course, was a dramatic period for all ex-Soviet territories, very, very difficult times, including Kazakhstan. And of course, we have rising China. So again, another now a powerful neighbor, huge economy, first of all. Chinese economy compared to Central Asian economies, including Kazakhstan, I always like to think, like to see it like United States in 1950s next to Latin American countries. You see what I mean? Like a huge economy. I mean, unbelievably huge, incredible. It's difficult to imagine that size. And then next to that, there's a small country cultivating bananas. In Central Asian case, it might not be bananas, it might be cotton, it might be oil, gas, raw materials, minerals, gold, copper, coal. So they try to kind of balance these three different forces of Western companies, corporations, and Western governments, Russia, China. That was the case, and still that is the case. Actually, nothing has changed.
I wanted to ask you a question, Haroon. Internally, in terms of the Kazakh population, what percentage of the population still has some sympathetic orientation towards Russia, and what percentage is more interested in perhaps pivoting towards NATO or reaching out to the West? Is it a similar situation to the Ukraine, where we have a kind of ideological balkanization of population in terms of where they want to orient themselves in terms of a metropole? Do they want to have a Moscow as a metropole, or do they want to have a city in Germany or the capital of the EU as a metropole?
That's a good question, actually. I would say a Kazakh case is different than the Ukrainian one. I mean, the history is different, economy is different. There are so many differences. It's not parallel. I mean, Western culture is, of course, very prominent in Kazakhstan, as everywhere else. Wherever you go in the world, I assume, like from Madagascar to Paraguay. I mean, you will always find products of Western culture. That's unescapable. There's no alternative. So that's, I would say, and this is the case also in Kazakhstan. But like I would say in more urban Russian-speaking Kazakhs would prefer to keep a balance between different let's say different powers, and that probably they would see it a more a better scenario for Russia. For Kazakhstan. I mean, there are a lot of Kazakhs living in Russia as well, working there. They not only like cheap cheap labor, like uneducated cheap labor. No, there are a lot of middle class Kazakhs working in Russian banks, IT people working in Moscow, because they couldn't find, they couldn't build the career, for instance, they couldn't climb up the career ladder for various reasons in Kazakhstan, and Moscow promises more opportunities to them, Russian market. That's why there's also there's a labor migration from Kazakhstan to Russia. So there are family links, you see, part of the family living in Russia, part of it living in Kazakhstan. And people, you know, in their ordinary lives, they don't usually take these things, their lives are not shaped by some geopolitical imaginations. People live their ordinary lives, their normal lives. You know, someone wants to find a job here, someone wants to marry there and have children. You know, the ordinary priorities of life, I would say, dictates like that, not the geopolitical. People don't think about these in their daily lives that much, I guess.
Haroon, on that note, like there's some people in the American left that argue that protests against the Kazakh government, in terms of like a color revolution, like a U.S.-backed plot to decentralize or destabilize Central Asia. And how do you see that interpretation? You know, especially versus off of like people could just be arguing against, you know, their own material conditions not being met.
Yes, yeah, I don't agree with them. There are claims that it was a Western conspiracy, colored revolution, you know, and there are also, believe it or not, but there are also claims that it was the whole thing was planned in Moscow. That was a Russian conspiracy. I see neither of them in Kazakhstan.
Do you see Moscow wanting to have a certain return to Soviet era hegemony, though, with Putin in charge?
Now, apart from the recent events in Kazakhstan, in general, there is a Russian perception of security. And that is about having buffer zones around Russia, because Russia is a land, it was a land empire, and it is a big chunk of land in the middle of Eurasian continent, right? That's why for them, like it is for the British to have a strong navy in the 19th century, for them, the threat comes from land. Historically, for last 300 years, there were 3 times when a strong European army marched towards Russia. First was the Polish army, and then the French army, and then the German army.
You forgot the Swedish.
Swedish, they were already in Baltics. Russians actually pushed them out of the Baltics. So there's a perception of threat, and for them the solution is to have buffer zones. But what happened in Kazakhstan, I think, is not about big geopolitics or big politics, you know, big people playing big games. I think it was, I don't see any conspiracies there, Western conspiracy or Russian conspiracy in Kazakhstan. That's my personal view. I can go into details if you like, but there just one sentence I want to add before I stop. In short, in two sentences, the protests started on the 2nd of January, when ordinary people went out to streets to protest. The protest was against a rise in price of LGP, liquefied gas prices. It was raised 100% from 60 tenge to 120 tenge per liter. And you cannot explain to people in a country where oil and gas is abundant as water. You cannot say that the global energy prices are rising. That's why you have to pay the same price. No, nobody will buy that. But then, after this first stage, where there were peaceful protesters, those economic demands, I can go into detail the social economic background of that. Later on, at the second stage, there was a second stage, as it always happens in these protests. There was a power struggle among the political elites in Kazakhstan. So, in a way, one branch of the political elite tried to eliminate the other branch by hijacking these protests of ordinary people on the street. In order to one part eliminate the other, they also asked Moscow's assistance. So, in a way, this also reminds me 1848 revolutions in Europe, because somehow I find some resemblance there, a similar picture. At that time, nationalism was the ideology of liberation, emancipation, and nationalism promised everyone that ordinary people would be free and emancipated from the feudal limitations, regulations, and people are prized because of this promise, like Hungarians in Austro-Hungarian Empire, for instance, Austrian Empire. At that time, it wasn't Austrian Empire. Hungarian nations led by ideologies and activists of that time, and Austrian Empire, Austrian army could not deal with this because it was not only Hungarians, but also Czechs were uprising. There were other nationalities were also they also start to fight against the regime, against the existing political elite and political system. And the Austrian emperor asked for Russian help, and the Russian Tsar sent a huge army. If I'm not mistaken, like 150,000 soldiers, and that was equal to the whole uprising people. Like it's the air forces. So the Russian army crushed the Hungarian uprising and helped Austrian monarchy, Habsburg monarchy, to rule nearly another century until the First World War, in a way. Thanks to that intervention, restoration of the order or protecting the status quo, the Habsburg monarchy continued. And that's why, hence, of course, after that, Russian Tsarism, Russian Empire had this label, the policeman of Europe, gendarme of Europe, keeping the status quo, suppressing any revolutionary activities. So what happened in a way in Kazakhstan, everything started with ordinary people going out protesting against economic conditions, lack of justice in the country, corruption, and so on, which turned into a bit more to a political demands as well. Some protesters wanted more freedoms, rights, and return to a more democratic constitution in the country. At that moment, there was a political struggle. I can go into detail. Among the elites, one party wanted to eliminate the other. They used this, in a way, hijacked these demonstrations. I suspect some of them, some provocateurs also appeared among the demonstrations in order to justify suppression or the reaction of the regime further down the road. Shooting guns and so on, burning some buildings, because the initial protesters were very organized, orderly, and peaceful. Last stage is the group that wanted to eliminate the other group called Moscow and said, guys, do you want turmoil and chaos beyond your southern borders? If you want the status quo to remain, you need to help me. So, because there could be, because the president could not trust if his military intelligence organization and the police was 100% loyal to him, or if there could be another, palace coup, intrigues might be going on. So he wanted to have an external force to re-establish the order. That's what happened. So in a way, who used who is a big question. There's a Russian saying, "Kto kogo," like who uses whom. Was it the Moscow using someone in the Kazakhstan, or actually part of the Kazakh elites were using Moscow in order to consolidate their position and eliminate the other group? That's a big question. But I don't see any conspiracy in advance, like now we will organize this group, they will go out on the streets, shout, and then we will send these guys, and then things will turn into, like, the country go into kind of a chaos, and then we will intervene, hijack. That also diminished the role of local agents nearly to zero. Local economic conditions, social conditions, local power struggle, people's sufferings, they all considered as they do not exist. I mean, when you go down the road with that conspiracy theories, that there wasn't any.
I wanted to ask you a follow-up question, if you will, Haroon. You make a very, very important point in that the desire of many people on the left to assume that any time there is an opposition uprising in a country that, or against a country that is considered to be a counter-hegemon in the United States, that is almost always assumed that it's a CIA-sponsored or NED, National Endowment for Democracy-sponsored color revolution. I remember vividly when the situation arose in Sudan, a lot of people were saying that the forces that took out the Bashir administration in Sudan were a color revolution. But when you talk about the protests in the Kazakh region, and you talk about political economy, there's one thing that I have not heard anyone really considered, and I've heard very scant discourse about. What about the role of COVID in causing the economic precarity that might be causing the destabilization that's facing the Kazakhs, particularly because we do know that the Russians are not doing very well in their management of COVID at all? And how are the other areas and regions doing so also? And is that playing a factor in causing the discontent with the factions in the country?
You made 2 points, and they're both important. First of all, yes, of course, we know historical examples of those kind of interventions, intrigues. The American agencies, security agencies, intelligence agencies, they are capable of, and they demonstrated their capacity of doing such things for the whole 20th century. From Nicaragua to Iran, from Guatemala to Congo, Indonesia. There are countless examples. You know better than me, and as a person who is aware of this, I consciously say that I don't think that this was the case. But then again, sometimes certain things happen because of the local conditions, and external players can hijack. They can manipulate an ongoing process towards their own goals. Towards a point that they wanted to bring. They can manipulate the local actors, local currents, in order to bring that country from A to B. Although if they haven't intervened, perhaps things would develop in a different way, of course. But in the Kazakh case, there's one big reason why I don't see a reason. There's for either Russian conspiracy or Western conspiracy, because in Kazakhstan there is no one gains anything extra by changing the status quo, right? This is a country, a very rich, mineral-rich country. Like the gold, oil, gas, coal, copper, everything you want, you have it. It's the size of Western Europe, around 20 million lives. It's like, and the market is open to Western corporations. They heavily invested in the Caspian Sea shore, because the Soviets of course invested in oil and gas industry in Kazakhstan, northwest Kazakhstan, the Caspian Sea. There were oil wells, etc. But the Soviet technology was not developed enough to exploit offshore deposits. They could only exploit the land deposit land or very close to the shoreline. So what American, British, Italian corporations, big oil and gas corporations brought was this new technology. Mm-hmm. The same thing happened in Azerbaijan as well, in the Caucasus. So that's why they actually have something to lose if the status quo changes, and because once things starts to change in political sphere, there might be economic consequences in economic sphere. You don't know where exactly things can end.
Sorry to interrupt you real quick, but I think this is a really important point that you're touching on, because so often what you hear kind of regurgitated, especially in these media circles, is that it has to be some sort of U.S. influence. And what you're saying is that the United States corporations and many corporations in the West have a vested financial interest to keep the status quo. Jean, would you like to expand on this notion as well? Because I know you speak out about it very eloquently.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Haroon. I mean, of course, there are places where we see American influence, and I agree. You have cases where you have an indigenous revolution, and of course, external actors attempt to shape and control that revolution. Syria being probably the best example of recent years, where you have an uprising against the Ba'athist regime, largely because of a local set of conditions, but then everybody and their mother, including the CIA, gets involved and prolongs the conflict. Now, I would say, I would agree, Haroon knows a lot more about this than me, but I don't see American corporations, and let's remember, the Kazakh government was being advised by Tony Blair. There were huge investments into Kazakhstan from Western industry. If we, there may be strategic reasons why one would, as the United States, would want to destabilize Central Asia, whether it's Belt and Road or to annoy the Russians. But if we agree that corporations are powerful in the United States, there's also big countervailing forces to maintain the status quo, because Kazakhstan has the Kazakh elite may be corrupt, they may be venal, but they've played this balancing act. And if you take Kazakh oil and gas off the global market, that's going to be a big
catastrophic.
It's going to be catastrophic for a lot of different places.
Gene, you've said this before, that American exceptionalism also works in this context as well. The idea that no country can do anything on their own. It always has to be the influence of America.
Well, I think there are places where America has more institutional experience and has a longer tradition of
the Americas.
Of the Americas, like like Latin America, the Caribbean. We see very clearly that the United States has like a very strong playbook, institutional memory. But Kazakhstan, do they have compared to the influence that the Russians can exercise? I'm not sure that the United States has even has the capacity to shape events in Central Asia the same way that it does in, let's say, Latin America or the African continent and places like that. This place was locked up behind the Iron Curtain until a generation ago. So we're dealing with I'm just very suspect about they're just, most of the world is American playground, but there are some parts of the world, especially as we see the emergence of a more multipolar geopolitical situation. There are some parts of the world where the Americans are not the top dog. They're not even the second dog, because if we're looking at Central Asia, the Chinese factor has to drop in as well. And, I think the Chinese, they're quite happy for the Russians to go in there and play the role of policeman, because the Chinese are generally conservative with their foreign policy. And so long as it's stable and so long as there's someone there who can keep things in order, they're happy to go along with it. What'll be interesting is whether in the long term, Russia and China don't come to blows over Central Asia, but that's, probably way down the line.
Now, Pascal has a question about
Islam. I wanted to interject about a couple of things. One, I still want to know if that, and if it's totally not a factor, just let me know if COVID was a factor at all whatsoever in terms of
yes, exactly. You are right. I think that was, I suspect that was part of it. I mean, this discontent, if I give you some details about the economic conditions or social conditions, for instance, prior to the riots, prior to the protests, that might fill some gaps, because we usually react to things. We sometimes react like this, like we suddenly see headlines like, oh, there are riots, some protests in Kazakhstan, and the police is shooting, and the people are behind the barricades. What's going on there? Is there a conspiracy behind it? But if you don't know the economic conditions, what the life of the ordinary people in the ground, grassroots feelings, then everything is up in the air, and sometimes those gaps can be filled by some conspiracies. This is, again, I do not deny that, of course, there as also Ginny said, like as in the Syrian civil war, external actors very often intervene if they find an opportunity to achieve certain political foreign policy goals, to execute their own agendas. But here, for instance, in the protests, this is not the first protest in Kazakhstan, actually. Before, there were a couple of years back, there were protests in the oil and gas region in Zhanaozen, and there are strong labor unions there because oil and gas industry is the main remaining big industrial branch of the economy where people experience this usual production relations, you see, between, let's say, between capital and labor, if you put it in probably Marxist terms. So first mass protests broke out after the New Year holidays. For this, the initial reason was the rise of this price of gas for cars, because of expensive oil, many drivers, including cab drivers, switched to liquefied gas from oil, you see, as a fuel. So, and when the price went up from 60 to 120 tenge per liter, that was of course awful for all these drivers and their household. And it started in west of Kazakhstan in Mangistau region, as I said, in the heartland of large oil production enterprises, because this is where protests happened a couple of years ago, where even the protesters occupied the local administration center, and police shot strikers, 15 strikers, and injured a couple of hundreds. And the administration was, I mean, they experienced some difficult days back in those days. They were afraid that this could spread to whole country. Anyway, going back to 2nd of January, then the protests also spread to other cities, to Almaty, to the ex-capital economic center of the country, and then to the political center, to the capital of the country. And then the protesters clashed with police, but the Kazakh authorities tried to first explain that the gas prices increased because the price is now determined by electronic bidding. This is what market has decided. You know, we have a free market economy. We have nothing to do with this. But then, in a country where there are a lot of gas and oil, and when people also experience corruption and injustices in their daily lives, if this is part of their daily lives, of course they didn't buy this argument. You know, you cannot convince people with this argument. So what happened is, as a precaution, the government stepped back. They lowered the gas prices, and it's a presidential system. The cabinet resigned or dismissed. But then the protesters continued their activities, and but this is like a tipping point. This is like where this like a boiling point. You see, this is like a threshold, because there have been social problems accumulating for years, and COVID as well, the COVID pandemic, and the deteriorating economic conditions because of COVID also, I think, was an important factor here. So, and also the rising gas prices was a consequence of COVID. So they are all interconnected. But there was a discontent before this. But probably things reached to a boiling point with COVID, and unemployment and gas prices, rising gas prices. You see, so this there is this. As I said, the economy is very much dependent on oil and gas production, oil and gas exports as well, and there's they have companies that are experiencing probably much more freedom than their, let's say, branches in a Western country, in Western Europe. The labor unions are weak traditionally, thanks to the Soviet legacy, actually. Jobs were cut because the oil and gas industry went to a large-scale optimization, and jobs were cut. Workers began to lose their salaries. For instance, Tengiz Oil, as far as I know, fired 40,000 workers at once, and it became a big shock in that region, Western Kazakhstan. Because one oil worker actually feeds 5 to 10 family members. They have big families, so a dismissal or firing of a worker automatically condemns the whole family, to starvation.
So Harun, Pascal has one more question before we get to the Ukraine. So Pascal, do you want to hit up that final question and then we pivot to the Ukraine?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Gene. One of the things, unfortunately, in the consciousness of most Americans in the West is that when you say Islam and Muslims, they think Arab, Middle East, and they don't realize that the largest population of Muslims we have is actually in Malaysia. But there's a large Muslim population around the region in the former Soviet Union, and we also know that there are a large number of Muslims in Kazakhstan. Is there an Islamist element in Kazakhstan at all? I've always been curious about this because we know that when the Chechens were going through their separatist phase, the Russians used that as a pretext to claim that there was almost a kind of like Islamist, quote unquote, Al-Qaeda-like movement in Chechnya to punish them. Does anything similar to that exist in Kazakhstan, or do they have a more kind of mild type, moderate type of Islam in that particular country? Yeah, someone was correct. It's Indonesia, not Malaysia, in terms of the majority Muslim country.
I see. Kazakhs, because they have no. Short answer is no. During these protests, perhaps 10, 15 radical militants, sleeping cells activated, and they thought that's the opportunity. Now there is no police on the streets. There are protesters everywhere. There's a chaotic situation. Let's go and burn the town administrative center, government's office at the town center in a town, and it's claimed that in one of the towns this happened. And they just, in an opportunistic way, they thought perhaps, but this is like 15 militants going out and using this lawlessness, gap of absence of power, absence of rule on the streets, and just doing what they were dreaming about for a long time, and finding this as seeing this as an opportunity. I mean, they were not alone, because there were some mafia groups ransack some gun shops for the future, to refresh their gun stocks, rifles and bullets and so on. So when there's no law on this in the streets, there's no order. You can find all kind of people, but there's no big radical Islamic movement in Kazakhstan. There has never been. The problem is this discontent, economic problems, big gap, poor and rich. Hundreds of thousands or millions moving from the villages to cities, living in shanty towns around the poor districts, emerging like mushrooms after rain. They do not have access to the wealth. wealth distribution is really bad. A very small elite enjoys creme de la creme. They enjoys the cream of this big natural exploitation of big deposits, oil, gas, and so on, with foreign corporations, and the huge majority, they cannot have access to normal health services, education. If their sons and daughters, if they want to find a job, proper job, they need to know someone within the system. Otherwise, skills and merits do not count at all.
Wow.
If you are rich, you can hit with your car someone and kill someone by accident, and you can get away with it. But if you are poor, you might end up in jail easily. Nobody will defend you. All kind of injustice, discontent, of
Sounds
course.
like the purge.
Feeds,
The purge. Sounds like the purge is going on over there.
All these things, of course, feeds all kind of ideologies, and Islamic extremism benefits from these conditions. You see, some people, of course, think that seeing this picture, probably the salvation is in religion, and if people of the book, if people who are really pious, believers, if they come to power, they will bring justice, they will bring order, and everyone will be free and have bread on their table. So that's, of course, that's not good. This discontent generates conservatism and, in some cases, fanaticism. Islam becomes the ideology of discontent, of newly urban ex-villagers.
And before we pivot,
just one sentence, probably becomes a ideology of in Marxist terminology, probably Islam becomes a ideology of not petit bourgeois, the other term,
lumpen proletariat.
Exactly. So, and that's a false call for emancipation and false address to solve the issues, economic issues, social and economic issues in the country. But that's the way. That's the reality.
And before we pivot to some questions about the current situation in the Ukraine, as our wonderful moderators, what they do is they look you up and then they put links to you in the chat so people can buy your book, follow you on social media. There is apparently another Harun Yilmaz. It is a weightlifter. Are you aware of this person? Or is that what you did in a former life? What's going on here, Haroon?
Yeah, can you actually stand up, prove you're not just jacked?
That's a Russian conspiracy, They planted that guy to discredit my image.
Yeah, he doesn't know anything. This guy's just a meathead.
Yeah. Someone said, I don't know which one is which, but if this is the weightlifter, he's smart as fuck.
It's all the steroids.
Yeah.
Brain steroids.
But no, and to like shifting to Ukraine, if you could, and going through another a few hundred years and a few minutes of history, what some of the relationship with Ukraine and Russia, especially with some of these contested regions, and not that they're contested over regions, I should say. And also, and what I'm curious about is any of your thoughts as far as that balancing act between Russian and Western hegemony and and also getting the new president who is, was a comedian. There was a lot of fanfare, but is his, I guess, not like lack of experience in these type of like large geopolitical issues. Did that lead to this kind of like moment where they start like Russia and the US start pushing a little bit more?
So you don't think a comedian as president is a good idea? President Fozzie Bear?
I mean,
what's going on with the economy?
Hey, I'm just asking questions. I'm just asking questions.
I think Zelenskyy, the president, current president of Ukraine, is a very competent person, competent man, very intelligent, very. I think he knows. He can surpass. I can assure you, many American politicians. He knows well what he's doing. His background might be being a comedian. But he's doing really well. I'm very much impressed by, especially by his recent speeches and comments on what's going on Ukraine, or let's say how he sees his country within a bigger picture. So I think he's a very he's doing much better than people expected. I don't see a reason to ridicule him. He's doing well. Now about someone wrote Zelenskyy probably more qualified than Biden. I would agree with that. I didn't want to give any concrete names, but he's a very clever guy. He's a very clever guy, young, energetic, and clever guy, I would say. But this doesn't mean that I endorse everything he does and everything he will do in the next 5 years. Just for the moment, I want to put it.
Do you think that him, even with his past and just being a new president, that played a role in some of the moves and different engagements that's been happening recently?
No, I think if anything, if his past played a role, I guess it was a positive one, because the comedy show he had before being a president, in that comedy show he was also a president, so he was in a way warming up for the role. If you look at it retrospectively, probably that show helped him a lot. There was a famous political comedy in Britain. I don't know if you ever watched the Yes Minister and the Yes Prime Minister. I think the script writers were brilliant. And if I played, I think the actors who played in those Yes Ministers probably would be also good ministers if they start to be really active in politics.
Go ahead.
But going back to Ukraine and Russia, I don't see, the first of all, let me start with the most important aspect of this crisis. The biggest question is, the most important question is, if there is going to be a war in Ukraine, and if Russia will occupy big chunks or big parts of half of Ukraine, according to those scenarios and maps you can see on mainstream media. My answer is no, and I have I can explain you why. There won't be a war unless an uncontrolled, a fraction within an intelligence service or a military provokes something. I don't think that Moscow plans to occupy Ukraine. They don't need to occupy Ukraine, and they don't. This is not how Moscow uses hard power or military power in foreign policy. They have a different way of doing it. Full scale of war is something Russia constantly avoids, and it will avoid in Ukraine as well.
I do have a quick question for you. Sorry to interrupt, and it is to what you're talking about. Do you think Putin is a master strategist when it comes to things like this, or do you think this is going to blow up in his face?
I think he's a master of leverage. He can move like David and Goliath. You know, he can. He waits for the right moment, and he knows that he has only one bullet, and he fires that bullet, and usually he shoots well, like a sniper. Why I'm saying he has only one bullet? Because the American budget, the main adversary or rival, let's say at global scale in geopolitical terms, the American budget is 11 times more than the Russian defense budget. Pentagon's budget is 11 times more than the Russian defense budget. That's a fact. And the strategists in Moscow know this fact very well. When they plan something, I think they remember this fact every day, 24 hours of the day, 30 days of a month. They know that their military budget, defense budget, is 11 times smaller than the American defense budget. It's not only about it's not about dollar comparison. It's not about like quantitative comparison. In qualitative sense, that in qualitative comparison, also American army is the strongest army in human history. I mean, you might ask me, oh, why they were defeated here and there. That's another question. But as a force that you can mobilize, this is a huge power, huge, uncomparable. So, as you know, the next 12 countries, actually, Russia, China, Britain, France, next biggest defense budgets in the world, next 12 defense budgets in the world. Russia, China, France, Germany, Iran, Israel. When you add them up together, it equals to the American Pentagon defense budget. So, and the technology Pentagon has is top technology. I mean, they invest billions of dollars in technological development in military. So, and Russians know this, and that's why they have to be master of leverage. They have to use a small amount of power in order to gain 2-3 times more. There's this cost-effective approach they have. They have in Africa, they have in the Middle East, they have in
Haroon.
Yeah,
I wanted to interject. You said something that I think I got to counter in terms of the United States, large and very extensive military budget and the size of the U.S. military and their military prowess that completely humiliated in Afghanistan less than 6 months ago. The United States muscle and military power does not stop the fact that there are certain times in which its capacity to have a military or armed services has been totally ineffectual in getting powers that are with less money or smaller or in certain geopolitical locations to be absolutely devastated. The United States has been quagmired in the Middle East for years.
I completely agree with you. There are also historical examples, Vietnam, for instance, right? But that's I completely agree with you. But for a strategist, if you are sitting in Moscow, you have to acknowledge or take into consideration the immense power. You cannot leave it to chances, like they failed here and they might fail there as well, kind of. You have to make your calculations accordingly.
Yeah, but Haroon,
as a reality, as a fact, in general.
All things you just said in terms of how the United States has all of this military technology, more budget. The Soviet Union has over 1,000 more nuclear warheads than the United States. That's a fact. So in terms of actually global geostrategic destructive capacity with the most dangerous weapons in the world, the former Soviet Union, the Russians eclipsed the U.S.
Is that, well, like, the only pushback on that is that when it comes to nuclear arms that are online.
No, that's weapons, warheads.
Yeah, online.
Yes,
like you push a button right now and it fires, versus how much you're stockpiled, and like, I know this is semantics and everything like that, but like it gets to the point where it's like you could destroy the world 3-4 times over with each stockpile that any country has, and the thing is, like, where I agree with Haroon is that the capacity for destruction is there. The capacity for complete annihilation, for the United States military to just roll through and kill everyone is there. How it's utilized, that's a whole different story. But
there's also another fact. That's what type of war are we talking about?
Yeah, exactly. When we look at Gene makes a very good point, because listen, in the age of drone and technological warfare, you can have a war with a country and never send your military.
I mean, this is the concrete point I would say. Look at the Iraq war. The Iraqi state army, the army of the Iraqi state was crushed in a couple of weeks, right? But that wasn't what defeated the Americans in Iraq, just as it wasn't, so Russia obviously is going to look at planning wars on a state-to-state level, on a state-to-state conflict level, in which case that's a very different equation from whether you're a guerrilla army who is doing a totally different type of war. So I see what your point is, Pascal, that the United States military is not an omnipotent force, but at the same time, I see what Haroon's saying is, if you're a state planner and you're planning for state-to-state conflict, like these type of conflicts that don't happen anymore, your calculus is totally different. If you're fighting this low technology war, if you're and increasingly we are seeing, and we saw it in the war in Azerbaijan recently, all this drone technology, all this kind of like funky technology is being used, and the Americans have a lead in it. So I see the, and what makes it even more dangerous, actually, is, I think, and I don't know if you guys would agree with me, is that the actual number of men that the United States has to deploy to like exercise extremely violent force is a lot lower. Like when you had to deploy thousands and thousands to Vietnam, well, you take a couple of thousand casualties, even if you're dishing them out to the Vietnamese 10 times, the political will in the United States saps away. But when you're just talking about having dudes in California with remote control drones droning people and all this kind of stuff, that's another I mean, like, I'm not an expert on war.
Well, in military contracting, like grazed that number, and like as far as like, because you're going from Vietnam to right now, you're looking like 50 to 1 service members to like 50 service members to 1 contractor. At this point, it's 2 to 1 in the reverse, and so that obfuscates the actual number of people deployed. But you are correct, like as far as like the amount of people that are deploying into areas and engaging in scenarios is like infinitely smaller. It's just we don't hear at all about like the contractors that get fucking schwacked, and the Pentagon's not responsible for announcing that.
You never hear about the contractors.
I'm sorry, you're about
no,
to say
no. I was actually getting ready to pass the mic to you.
Thank you so much. Now, one of the followers said, therefore, Putin picks his battles. This is probably exactly what I want to say in a sentence. Putin picks his battles and does it very carefully. The strategists in Moscow, why I'm explaining this, I want to explain, first I want to explain you how I think that they are looking at things, and then to explain what's going on in Ukraine. You see, what's the aim, what's the goal, and what are the means for Moscow, and what's the cost-effective move, cost-effective steps to achieve those goals as a strategist. Because the Russians know their economic or military limits, they first of all analyze everything well on the ground. They make a risk assessment. They understand what's the cost and gains. And then if gains are 2-3 times bigger than the cost, they move on, right? They take the risk, they take a very calculated risk. For instance, in 2008 in Georgia, the Georgian president at that time, Saakashvili, decided that he can take back the separatist region of South Ossetia by force. And perhaps if he succeeded there, he would go on to Abkhazia as well. These are two small ethnic separate regions in Georgia. So he ordered Georgian army enter South Ossetia, which was under the Russian protection, in one word, right? And after a week of battles between the Russian forces and Georgian forces, like even less than a week actually, after a few days, Russians pushed back the Georgian forces from South Ossetia and even crossed the border and entered to Georgia proper in a matter of 5-6 days. It's normal because it's like I don't know, Honduras is fighting against United States of America, right? Something like that. So what happened is Russians advanced into Georgia proper. They crossed the border, unrecognized border of South Ossetia, marched forward, but only 20 kilometers. They entered to the town of Gori and they stopped. If you look at the map, I don't have the map, I cannot show you now, but if you look at the map, there were some military operations next to the Abkhazian border as well, but overall, Russians did not have an overpowering adversary military force against them. Despite that, they stopped at a certain point. They could go further, occupy that bit of Georgia, which would literally divide the country into two separate halves, and also control the precious oil and gas pipelines from Azerbaijan to the Turkish coast in the Mediterranean, and they could literally trigger the collapse of the whole economic and political system in Georgia. Because the Georgian army, that small army, now after that was positioned around the capital of Tbilisi, and they thought that the Russian army would march towards Tbilisi, and they were just digging trenches there around the capital. But the Russian side did not do that. They didn't move forward. They stopped at the 20 kilometers out of the South of Ossetia into 20 kilometers in depth into the Georgia proper, and they stopped. And they let the Europeans come and run the negotiations, mediations, and the French president came and so on. And there was an agreement. And at the end, what happened is Russian forces withdrew. They went back to South Ossetia, and they gave back the proper Georgian territories to the Georgian government. In one word, they went back to the status quo ante, to the pre-war position of they said, okay, we push back the Georgian forces from South Ossetia, and we go back to the previous day before the conflict started. We will not gain anything. We will not lose anything. This is what we wanted: re-establish the existing order, right? Because if they have gone further, control the gas oil pipelines, divide the country literally into two halves by occupying the middle of the country, etc., there would be much bigger consequences and cost. The cost would rise beyond the gains they would have. So they decided this is too costly. We will not, instead of gaining those things, we will not go further. In Syrian case, in Syrian civil war, when they intervened in Syria, Russian strategists again, of course, made a calculation. Do we need to send an army, land army to Syria? Well, in logistic sense, it's very costly. Sending an army to Syria from Russia is a very costly operation. What are we going to benefit from this? Are we going to gain something big from that? So what they did, the question was, the answer was no. So the cost did not justify the benefits they would get. So their intervention, from a Russian sense, it was a successful intervention, by the way. Their intervention was limited to military advisors, special operation forces, and air bombardment, air force, airplanes. So that was the scale of intervention in Syria, which actually stands as a big contrast to the American deployment of force, overseas deployment, like to Afghanistan, to Iraq, and so on. Huge armies moving from one place to another, tanks, artillery units, armored vessels, and also whole logistics. In order to transport a gallon of water, clean water, from the US to Afghanistan, you have to spend, as far as I know, 9 gallons of fuel. That's the cost. So, into this, after the first 6 months of the Russian intervention in Syrian civil war, into that intervention, like after 6 months, the American side even, I think one of the secretary of one of those national security agencies acknowledged that that intervention changed the tide of the civil war. Things, the Assad became gained a much more powerful position than he had before the Russian intervention, and things did dramatically change within 6 months, and that was done with a limited cost. In Africa, the third example I'm going to give you, Africa is beyond the usual Russian traditional sphere of influence. Although the Soviets, of course, had good relations with some countries, but today, what happens? It's beyond the logistic operation, the limits of logistic operation for Russian army. But there are Russian mercenaries, paid soldiers in different places of Africa, in Mali, in Libya, in some say in Sudan as well. I don't know, but definitely in Mali, in Libya, and in Central African Republic. These soldiers actually, from the African point of view, from the governments of, if you look at from the point of view, the government in Mali or government in Central African Republic, they play an important role, because the institutions in these countries are not strong. Whoever can gather 500 people with Kalashnikovs is ready to organize a military coup in a country. So if you bring an external 500 people without any tribal or ethnic connections to a certain, in that country, then you have an independent force that you can rely on.
Haroon, I have to interject here. We're talking about Russian presence in Africa as if it's some kind of nefarious force, which it very well could be. Russian presence in Africa is not even a dot of ink in an ocean, considering the fact that the United States has AFRICOM, and the United States has been supporting coups with France in the African continent going back to the Cold War. And that actually oftentimes, in the case of Sudan, which I did some research on, one of the reasons why Bashir was thought to be an enemy of the U.S. is because he was reaching out to the Russians to provide him military weaponry. So I'm not going to deny, first of all, Russia is in Africa, China is in Africa, France is in Africa, Germany is in Africa, everyone is in Africa, because Africa has some of the most important resources used for technological development, particularly when it comes to coltan, particularly when it comes to uranium. I get that completely. And I'm not trying to say that Russia or China or anyone is an altruistic actor in the African continent. But
wait, can you say that again for the people in the back?
I said, I'm not trying to make it seem like Russia or China or anyone else is an altruistic actor in Africa, because these people are here to protect their geostrategic interests. But let's make this clear. The United States does that as well, but in terms of history of causing harm, I don't think France and the United States and the NATO allies could even pop a grape in comparison to the damage they've done compared to the Russians.
What do you got to say,
but I don't think Harum's making a point about the harm or motives necessarily of Russian intervention, but rather the style in which the Russians intervene. That is to say, it's of course, I mean, the Russian presence in Africa has been relatively small historically. It wasn't even a colonial power in Africa, so it doesn't have those kind of colonial links like France does or Britain does. But I think the point for Harun's trying to make is that he's trying to explain, and maybe I get this wrong, he's trying to explain the way the Russians intervene isn't in this like mow everything down way that the Americans do, but is a lot more calculated and limited. And and I think the examples you gave of Georgia and Syria are actually perfect of that.
Would the panel say that has a lot to do with Putin's ability, as you were talking about earlier, Haroon?
I don't think we should mystify.
I asked Haroon.
The panel.
Yeah,
sorry.
Haroon last.
I completely agree with Jeannie. That's what I want to say. The Russian strategists in Moscow, they know that they don't have that force that Pentagon has. That's why they have a certain style. That's what I'm saying, a very cost-efficient style. And why I'm explaining all these examples, because when we go back to Ukraine, occupation Ukraine, urban warfare, entering to a big urban area is by itself costly operation, and you cannot do this by only 100,000 soldiers in a country like Ukraine. This is a very costly operation. This is a billions dollars of operation, military operation. This is a huge cost. You endorse that if you have a real gain there, economic or political gain. Does Russia? Then that's the question. The following question is it a cost-efficient thing to do for Russia? No. This is not something that if you look at the pattern of this cost-efficient operations, the use of military power in foreign policy, in geopolitics, right? Very
well, can I interject
efficient.
This question? Was it cost efficient in 2014?
Okay, what happened in 2014 was a cost-efficient operation, both in the Crimea and in Donbass and Donetsk and Lugansk regions. They were cost-efficient operations, and on top of that, Russian strategists, including Putin, has that card in their hands. If they want to destabilize Ukraine, if they want to create a chaos in Ukraine, if they want to drain the economic and military power of Ukraine by engaging it into an endless conflict, they have it in eastern Ukraine. They gained that card as a tool of as a leverage, and they did not lose it. Why now to enter Ukraine in full scale, like American strategists usually like to do, with a huge army, with artillery, with tanks, airplanes, bombardment, and so on, and entering to different cities, Kharkov and others, engaging in urban warfare, which is very costly operation. I'm not only talking about human source, but also material source. You have to calculate all these things if you're a military planner. Every day is planned and calculated. The cost is calculated. It's not logical. It's unless you are in a desperate situation, like Russia is under a threat that, like in 1941 Nazi attack, or I don't know, Napoleon's march towards Russia. That's another story. Ukraine is not a threat like this. There are certain, so you might ask me then, what's the reason of this deployment, military concentration of military units at the Ukrainian border, if the intention is not the occupation of Ukraine? So what's the intention? Why do we have those military units at the border, right? That is, I think, the key question, and I think the answer is a specific answer. Again, strategists in Moscow, they have a specific target, and they have a relatively cheap, low cost, which is like moving units from one place to another within Russia. It doesn't cost anything to you. Or building new barracks for them so that they can winter there. You can spend the winter at the,
so do you have a guess of what the specific ask?
Next to the.
I was like, do you have a guess of what the specific ask is? It was like, if the specific ask, in which outwardly, the Russian government is saying, pull back of NATO forces, especially some of the U.S. Stationed forces and missile batteries, making sure that Ukraine doesn't join the EU. Should we believe these up front as like the kind of reasoning for this, or do you see something else?
Now, if you look from the deployment of military force, if you look at from that perspective, moving military units next to the Ukrainian border has there is a target there. There is, again, as next to that limited military operation, low cost efficient operation, there is a specific political target there. It's not the occupation of Ukraine. As I said, this is not. This doesn't fit into the style Russia operates, and it's very costly. And you need more than 100,000 troops to do that. 100,000 troops is not enough for that operation in the Ukrainian context, I think. You will be stuck in at some point, and there will be a lot of body bags are coming back to Russia. And currently, Russia, it can trigger a revolt in Russia, because things are not always things are not very good in Russia anyway.
So what are they trying to get, Harun? What do they want? Why are they doing this?
What they want now? There are different theories about this. I will go straight away to the one that I believe what they aim, what they want to do. Since 1710, since beginning of 18th century, the time of the Peter the Great, until 1991, Russia was a stakeholder, a partner in this in European security system, security structure. They are, since 1991, especially since the 2000s and since the NATO's expansion, Russia is excluded from the issues, discussion of the issues of European security. In one word, Moscow forces the West by concentration of troops to finally negotiate with the Russians on the issues of European security. And if this is the intended target, not the occupation of Ukraine, Moscow has already gained from the current standoff with the US. Now, what are these negotiated issues? To be concrete, I can give you, for instance, a moratorium on the deployment of long-range missiles, limitation on military exercises in close proximity to the Russian borders, including naval and air force training exercises, and the ones imitating nuclear missile launches. These things were brought by Moscow to the table repeatedly, but the Americans usually, if they don't see the stick, they don't talk to you, because they think that sometimes they think that they're so superior. They just another guy is bubbling at another corner of the world. They don't take it seriously sometimes, those kind of European security issues they want to negotiate with the US. That's why they said, okay, we will not initially they said we will not discuss these things with the Europeans. We want to talk to the master, right? So they directly approached the US and said, talk to France, Germany, NATO headquarters. These are all smokescreen, these are all like small players. We want to deal with the US because we want to be stakeholders of the European security structure, not exclude.
Harun, I'd like to ask a question and interject based on
being excluded. We are a European country, see themselves as a European country, and they are excluded. That's the goal. And this is the goal. This cost-efficient operation is going well because every day for the last 2-3 weeks, Americans and Russians are negotiating. Behind the doors, in front of the doors, behind the curtain, in front of the curtain. They're constantly negotiating, exchanging letters, and hopefully something will come out from that. If not, there are two, it seems to me like there are two now negotiation channels. One of them with the German and the French government and Russians, that European channel, right? And direct with Washington, D.C. Because the timing is also interesting. Perhaps there are different explanations why the timing is right now.
Well, Pascal wants to jump in with a question. Pascal, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to jump in with a question based on a very good video that I found on YouTube that was shared with me from someone who works in foreign policy, works at the UN, and it's called "How the United States Created Vladimir Putin." And the speaker is a man named Vladimir Posner. You might know, I'll be familiar with him. I believe
I watched the video. I know Posner, yes.
Okay. And one of the things that I found fascinating in the video, and I'm not going to take it too much time, is that it explains that the rise of Putin is the direct consequence of the United States breaking very key promises to the post-Soviet Russian nation in terms of NATO expansion into the Russian sphere in which it was told that we're not going to cross XYZ Rubicon, we promise. And the United States continually crossed those Rubicons. And that the United States' continual crossing of those Rubicons had a direct correlation to the very kind of reactionary, more conservative, much more rash Russian nationalistic posture and rise of Putin. And what I'm saying is that one of the things that I find lacking in the analysis about what's going on in Ukraine is twofold. Number one, up until recently, and I shout out to Kuba for really giving me the details, up until recently, what I mean recently within 5 years, 80% of the natural gas that Russia sends to Europe goes through the pipelines in Ukraine. That's a fact. Now it's down to 40%. And it's down to 40% because the Russians made a particular pipeline deal with the Germans, and the Russians have been actively trying to diminish the role of Ukraine as an operational point to ship its natural gas. So one of the reasons why Russia is still interested in Ukraine and not having the United States encroach in that territory is that economically it has a role in its economic sovereignty as a nation state. Doesn't mean the Ukrainians don't have a right to negotiate their posture, but that's one thing that should be considered. And number two, the Russians being angered about the United States offering to have Ukraine or even the Kazakh regions enter NATO is the same in my eyes as if Russia is in Mexico and say, hey, listen, the BRICS are strong, join the BRICS, and we're going to put military weapons in the BRICS. How do you think the United States is going to react?
I think I just want to add to this.
I said, assuming if the BRICS was strong,
I want to add. I think Pascal is. I mean, like, I'd like to hear Haroon's take on this, but yeah, I think, the reactionary stance of the Russian government is clearly, if we look at it in a historical context, a product of, as Pascal says, the westward expansion of NATO. The Russians might have consented to Poland or to Hungary or those countries coming into the NATO, but like once NATO began pushing into former Soviet republics, then this was bound to cause a reaction. And this is a pattern we see throughout history. Revanchism in France was a product of the Prussian victory over France in 1871, which led to France, going back and after the First World War, imposing a very brutal peace treaty on Germany, which led to German revanchism in return. So when we look at the way that capitalist powers interact with each other, we see this as a pattern. So anyone with an ounce of sense would have known that if you start, pushing your alliance system and your political hegemony further and further eastwards, it was bound to, at some point, going to elicit a reaction from Russia, which, as it recovered from the defeat in the Cold War, has begun to reassert its own sphere of influence. This is not a normative argument, but this is like international relations 101. So this is a problem that is fundamentally provoked by the United States and NATO expansion.
And
now, does that mean that we absolve the Russians of their side in this, bullying their neighboring countries? There's a reason that these neighboring countries are pissed off with the Russians. They don't all have a lovely experience of Russian rule, but the presence of the United States makes the security situation in Europe worse. I firmly believe if America withdrew from the European continent, withdrew all troops, all that, it would be a lot easier to come to some kind of peaceful security system, which the United States is not included with, and Russia would be happy. And Russia simply does not have the resources to be this like monstrous imperial power. It's an absolute freaking joke to think that they could suddenly invade Germany. They will bully their neighbors in the most cost-effective way that they can. What we need is a détente across the continent, and the American presence, I just don't think is beneficial to that state of affairs.
Okay, some quick facts, Jason. Bear with me here. Mm-hmm. The United States annual GDP is upwards close to $22 trillion. China's GDP is about almost $14, $15 trillion. Russia's GDP is not even $2 trillion. That's a fact. This is not a country that has the economic, geostrategic, that has the military because of the nuclear weapons. It does not have the money to be a force to compete with the United States in the world at all.
That's exactly what I tried to say, Pascal. That's why when the strategists in Moscow, when they plan something at international scale, they make this cost analysis very carefully. What we are going to lose and what we, in return, what we are going to gain. because of the limited budget, because of the limited resources. So, and occupying a whole country, a huge country, Ukraine is a big country, with a population, most of it ready to fight, that's a big cost for any military planner, not only for Russian planners, for any military planner. You have to think twice. If you have limited sources, you have more than twice. So then the question is, what is the aim and what we can do in a cost-effective manner to achieve that goal, to achieve that aim, to gain that, to have that benefit, to have that without a limit, with a limited cost. So that's how they think. That's how they operate in different theaters, zones of conflict. In Georgia, even in Ukraine. First, there was in 2014 when the president of Ukraine at the time, Yanukovych, deposed. There were some pro-Russian demonstrations in eastern Russian-spoken part of Ukraine. In the eastern corner of Ukraine, in exactly this Donetsk and so on. The Russian strategists thought, if we can, hijack these demonstrations, manipulate them, and turn it into pro-Russian and anti-government that was the new government against the government in Kiev, and turn it perhaps into a separatist movement, we can gain, and that is a cost-effective measure, right? Instead of intervening that to the new reality in Ukraine. And they did it. They manipulated the ongoing discontent against the new government in Kiev after Yanukovych was removed. They sent some provocateurs. Did they send? Yes, they sent some provocateurs. Did they send some money? Probably they sent some money as well. Some Russian agents crossed the border to eastern Ukraine and helped to organize that demonstrators to, let's say, go and occupy the government buildings, key locations in Donetsk and so on, in Lugansk as well. So this happened. And then they perhaps, did they arm them to fight against the Ukrainian army and start a separatist movement? Probably they did. They armed them. The Russians armed them, right? Those separatist, emerging separatist movements. They said, okay, open check for you, or blank check. You know, you want Kalashnikovs? Here we go, Kalashnikovs. I mean, it's cheaper than sending an army unit. This happened for the first 6 months until the end of, from the February 2014 until the end of July 2014. Because the central government, the new central government, pro-Western central government, I don't go into discussion like how they came to power, how Yanukovych was deposed, what happened in Kiev is another chapter. But the new government launched a military offensive against this separatist, let's say, separatist militia, separatist groups, and they squeezed them to the corner. They squeezed them to the Russian border. Like they retook the control of these territories which were controlled by the separatists till that moment. Right? They pushed them to the corner. When the Russian strategists in Moscow understood by the end of July 2014 that this support of sending a couple of advisors and ammunition across the border is not enough. We need to intervene further. You see, they sent some army units, soldiers without insignia, without any Russian flags and names of symbols of the army. They send them across the border to fight against the next to the separatists against the Ukrainian central government's military units. So, but then still they kept the cost low. They avoided a direct confrontation, and they till the end they refused to acknowledge that there were Russian soldiers and Russian military. So, I mean, members of Russian military, officers and soldiers and equipment on the ground. They refused to acknowledge it in order to avoid a full-scale war, because that would be costly, and that was not the aim. The aim was, in order to gain a leverage within Ukraine, to have a part of Ukrainian territory that could be used in the future if the country, for instance, first of all, to avoid NATO membership of Ukraine, because without territorial integrity, without the if the central government cannot control the whole country, if there is a border conflict with another country, or if there is a separatist group holding a part of the territory as a hostage, the central government cannot go and knock the door of NATO and say, "Hey, take me as a member," and NATO will not take that risk and accept them. That's for sure. So that's why they guaranteed that with this low-cost intervention, and also kept it as a leverage in the future in case to destabilize and drain the resources of Ukrainian economy and military in an endless conflict like this. Why I say endless? Because if there is a separatist movement in a country which also secured an external power, and if they have also an ideology, and if they have a couple of hundreds of trained military armed force, trained like warriors, soldiers, partisans, whatever you call it, it's nearly impossible to finish that. If there's an external supporter, if there is an ideology, mobilize the mass, and if there is an ongoing armed training of a certain amount of young men is enough. For a few hundreds is enough, actually. You will not finish it. It will continue. So it will generate, and then the population will fed up with this conflict. Regular army entering daytime, and then the guerrilla entering at night in villages and towns, and people will fed up, and they will be alienated. They will be against the central government in most of the cases, because they will have the burden of this conflict, being their villages and towns being the battleground. You see, so it's very difficult unless you use a real brutal force and crash it, and you have to be there are certain cases it happens in history. It happened, but there wasn't any external assistance. I can give you one good example: American War of Independence. Britain in 1770s was the America of today. I mean, the most powerful empire in the world in 1770s, nearly. I mean, they were of course rivals like French and Spanish, but without the external support, the American uprising against the central authorities, I doubt it would be successful. Believe me, there were a big support from the Spanish and French in order to be friend or to being. That how was it? The enemy of your enemy is my friend principle. They followed.
No separatist movement or revolution has ever been successful without external support in the modern era.
Exactly.
And the reason for that is because the organizational and institutional capacity of the nation state is so powerful that you cannot organize a countervailing force unless you receive the type of support. I cannot think of one case in which you do not have in which you don't have external direct external support or some kind of international shift in opinion that makes it untenable for the imperial power to stay.
And speaking of support,
in Ukrainian case,
hold on. 1 second.
Sorry. Just to add up, in Ukrainian case, those separatists are already a card in the Russian hands as a leverage, so they don't have to send a huge regular army in order to
to gain leverage.
Exactly, they already have the leverage, and on top of that, they have the Crimean Peninsula.
God damn, he had to bring out the Turkish. You know it's bad when Gene's got to bring out the Turkish.
Jason wanted to jump in.
I just wanted to say that this is all the bonus after hours that you guys are getting for free, because this is the Saturday free show. And I would like to thank everyone that is in the super chat for supporting.
Shout out
Landrew.
to
Shout out to Landrew for the big super chat. We really appreciate that, because that allows us to continue to do this show, and it allows me to pay for much better Wi-Fi here in Mexico.
Now, I think Haroon has done an excellent job of even explaining the Russian position and historical relevance of what the happenings are with Ukraine. Coming from the U.S. perspective, you got Joe Biden, largely even the spokespeople for the military-industrial complex saying there's no there's no going to be occupation, there's no going to be deployment of U.S. troops in defense of Ukraine. The most they're willing to do is send military equipment, especially targeting Russian armor capabilities. So even the response, if there was a Russian invasion, which I think we've beat the horse dead into dust, that's not actually what's happening. But I guess what would your response be to American media? But I think I see it's very, very big problem is there's a lot of people on the quote unquote left that says, well, what should we do about Russia in this situation?
Is the question to me?
Yeah. What would your response be?
I see. Before, thank you for that. That's an important point. Before that, one of the listeners, I think, wrote an important detail here, which where is it? Sorry, there was actually mass resistance to the Maidan regime in Donbass, especially after they started burning Russians in Odessa. I know those. I didn't want to go into the details. What happened in 2014? You are right. There were mass protests. I tried to watch all of them as much as I could from afar, follow them. I took the general picture, to summarize the whole event in a few sentences, in a short paragraph. But many things happened in those days, and there are different interpretations, of course, what happened in Kiev in those days as well, in February. So we are aware of. So now, look, there's an interesting positioning of the crisis in general. I see. One of them is this: Russia wants to re-establish a Russian/Soviet empire. The other one is this conflict is about and the continuity of this argument is Russia needs Ukraine in order to re-establish the Russian empire. Right now. There is an important aspect there. There's a logic within itself. If you want, because Russian historically, last 300 years, if you look at it, possession of the territory that we call Ukraine now, most of the Ukraine now, boosted the Russian state power with its sources. Losing Ukraine, even during the Second World War, when Ukraine was, the whole Ukraine and beyond that was occupied by the Nazi German forces, it was a huge blow to the Soviet economy, military power. I mean, the coal mines, grain, the amount of grain that is cultivated in Ukraine, and so forth. So the Ukraine, in a way, multiplied during the Russian imperial times and in the Soviet period. Overall, the unions or empires' power it multiplied it. So that's why there is a logic between these two statements. First, Russia wants to re-establish a new empire, reconstruct the empire. The second statement is Moscow needs Ukraine to do that. That's why they eventually want to occupy or incorporate Ukraine. They are doing bit by bit. But so these two are interrelated. But the question is if Moscow really wants to do that or not. If Moscow has the capacity to do that or not. Because Ukraine is one thing, but then if you go to Central Asia, for instance, if you look at the Soviet economy, Central Asia was actually overall, I suspect, was not a Moscow economic source that Moscow enjoyed much, but actually it was a territory where Moscow invested in a lot. In terms of infrastructure, education, health services, in an exponentially growing local population. Taking a country as bad as Afghanistan in 1920 and bringing it to a level, social level of, let's say, Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia in 1970s, 80s, something like this. You need to make a huge. That's a huge cost. It wasn't always a benefit for the Union now, and many Russians in Moscow now think that they are happy that they got rid of this, in a way, burden. They don't need to invest in and develop a huge territory, right? I mean, these are all disputed issues. That's what I'm saying. They are not like black and white issues. Another argument is this is a conflict between evil and good forces. Ukraine is now become part of forces of good, freedom and democracy, and Russia is the force of like the evil, like in a Star Wars movie, and that's why this is a clash of good and bad, and we have to stand next to the good, right, against the evil forces. Now, this is an interesting, of course, and very repeating interpretation of what's going on in different parts of the world. I usually do not follow that, agree with those kind of interpretations, because world is not a Star Wars movie, play screen or a script, and we are not in a Hollywood studio. There was a recent Rand Corporation report actually on that, exactly on this point. And what the experts at Rand Corporation says that there is this understanding through that in the West, like how should I put it? Let me check the exact note for you. I recently read it because it was interesting. So that the Ukraine, Russian strategists, according to RAND Corporation, there are no examples of Russian leaders speaking of their fear of the demonstration effects of Ukrainian democratic success on the Russian people. So, because the theory is, it's claimed that the Putin and his team worries that if Ukraine becomes a successful democracy and a prosperous democracy, the Russian people will demand the same, right? That's the theory. So that's why they are attacking Ukraine. They are bullying Ukraine in order to destabilize the country, so that democracy will not be successful in Ukraine. So we are here in a battle of evil forces and good forces, like the Lord of the Rings kind of thing, and we need to stand together with the forces of good. Now, the problem with this theory is that there is no fact that would prove that Russian leaders they have this kind of fear of a demonstration effect of Ukrainian democratic success on the Russian people. Yet there is abundant evidence that the Russian elites, political elites in Moscow, have a very low opinion of the Ukrainian counterparts. The intended the Russian government, and you can also find ordinary Russian people thinking like this, do not believe that they are, the Ukrainian elites are capable of achieving more than a half state without Western assistance, you see? So let alone become a thriving democracy. So that's why it's important also how Russian elites look at these things, not how the think tanks in Washington, D.C. sees how Russians think, like their interpretation of Russian mind, but actually what
Go
Russians
ahead,
think.
Yeah, I got to interject here, Haroon, because one thing we started off saying that Russia wants to create or recreate a Russian empire. My question is, how do we know that Russia doesn't simply want to protect its surrounding former nation state co-partners?
He didn't say that, though.
No,
he said that's one of the theories that is being put forward, right?
If that's one of the,
I didn't say that. I said this is one of the theories put forward as a causation, like why those troops are at the border, right? That's the question. And one answer is Russia wants to rebuild an empire. Well, that another theory is because Russia is against development of democracy and civil society in Ukraine. That's why they want to destabilize and create a kind of chaotic atmosphere in Ukraine. That's what they are doing since 2014, right? And there are also answers to each of these theories, explanations.
Yeah, but all of those theories, which come out of the West, as usually, are not premised on understanding that Russia has had its sovereign territory or the threat of its sovereignty subsidized by the West for going back to the fall of the Soviet Union, and that maybe Russia just wants to protect itself from the U.S. and NATO expansion. That makes a very logical, simple reason why we have this guy, and I'm not a Putin fan at all, why we have Putin being so reactionary and being, I would say, somewhat paranoid. And why everyone's like, Putin wants to destabilize NATO and the West. Well, what has the West been doing to destabilize the Soviet Union and Russia for 30 years or longer? This is ridiculous. This is a direct consequence of the myopia that we get from listening to the West in terms of its narratives of the world of who is the bad guy and who is the enemy. And I'm not a Russian stan at all. And I'll be very transparent. I have family that lives in Russia. I have two uncles who studied in the Soviet Union. I'm not a fan of Putin. But I also know that the U.S. lies and the West lies about who the quote-unquote enemy is for its own geostrategic purposes. Not that Russia wouldn't do it either, but my point is that we're not getting any balance here because we don't understand that one of the main reasons that we're in this conflict situation is because the United States has been encroaching on Russian sovereignty for 30 years.
Well, I think the other point is,
Here it comes!
I would add to that. I think this is important. This is what American exceptionalism is in practice. Americans like to think that their government has good intentions even when bad things happen, right? There's this whole mythology of American innocence that we tried our best and we messed up, and we're trying to defend democracy and we're trying to do all these good things. When in fact, well, there may be cases where American intervention might lead to a marginally better outcome. The vast majority of these interventions are not really done for the reasons that are being sold on the tin, and two, usually have a really detrimental outcome. But the American public has this belief that when America acts in the world, it's acting as a force for good, as a moral force. And this is what Kuba always talks about when he comes on the show. It's this whole Americans like to see that there's good guys and bad guys. And when I tell, if you go around the world, most people are going to see the Americans as the bad guys, right? Mm-hmm. The Americans like to sort of portray themselves, even in the popular culture, as the plucky underdogs fighting against the hegemonic imperial power. Just notice in Star Wars, the rebels have American accents and the Empire has British accents. But the reality is the United States is the Empire, right? It's why American war movies, like, how do you make a heroic war movie when you're the Americans and you're literally the ones with all the arms, the guns, and the weapons fighting against, like, people who may be bad dudes, but are, like, fighting against, like, massive odds. So America lives in this delusion of good versus evil, which leads even the American liberal establishment to go into this delusional fantasy world where every opponent, every enemy that America has is Nazi Germany, when in fact, even Nazi Germany, to some people in the world, like the people of India, we're the good guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, you just witnessed a TIR tag team. Here it comes!
I think some of this stuff is like just it's obviously false, but like obviously these narratives don't get like weaved together. But when you have the United States securing Saudi and Emirati oil to run through Qatar to save democracy in Ukraine, like what is really happening here? Like if you're trying to build an alternate supply chain for oil and natural gas for half a continent, that it's almost impossible to be established in order to quote unquote save democracy. Like this just doesn't make any sense.
Marcus, but they saved Kuwaiti democracy in 1991, and they had to intervene in case Saddam Hussein went and rolled over Saudi democracy.
They coup d'etat the first democratically elected president in Haiti twice and led an assassination of the last president we had in Haiti. It's all in the millennium. That's all after 2000.
Crack-a-lackin'. Yeah, so I think one has to understand that America's actions in the world usually don't have great results. That doesn't mean other players, though. We have to simultaneously recognize that America is the biggest imperial power and does, bad things with bad dudes and supports bad regimes, while simultaneously not falling into the trap of thinking that the CIA is like a Giga Chad organization that is pulling the strings around the world, and that non-Americans are not capable of producing their own assholes and their own reactionaries who act for their own reasons. I remember one Bolivian leftist I know said, look, America certainly was happy about the coup that was against Evo Morales, but only a Yankee could believe that our own racist white elite wasn't capable of trying to launch a reaction. And so, we have to avoid inverting American exceptionalism to understanding that global imperialism and global capitalism is a system. America is the center of that system. There are parts of the system that work in harmony with the United States, whether that's Canada, the European Union, the United States. And then there are capitalist powers that have counter-hegemonic aspirations like Russia. But they're all part of this same system, which by and large relies on exploitative industries, the exploitation of labor, political and economic oppression, and all those bad things we're against. So, for example, put it in a very concrete terms, like when people get all moralistic about, let's say you went and you spoke on Russia Today. Well, that's fine if you're using that as a platform, because I don't see that as worse than the New York Times, which lied the American public into a war in Iraq. You use the platforms.
Nigga, what?
Don't drink the Kool-Aid, right? Don't sell yourself out for. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Use the tools that you have at your hand, but be aware that all these people, whether it's the American corporate media, whether it's the state medias of other capitalist powers, they're all playing the game. They're all playing the same game, and that is the maintenance of the international capitalist system and the international political order. Because the Russians are not trying to fucking counter the United States by building global socialism. They just want their own imperial sphere of influence as well, just as they used to have. So America is the big dog, but there are other little dogs that could be dangerous if you're close to them. Would you say that was a fair assessment?
That is very fair assessment. I don't have any more sound effects that are appropriate, because I have extremely inappropriate sound effects at this point.
Give us an inappropriate sound effect.
No.
The better question is, what are you doing with the inappropriate sound effects without the show? That's the better question.
Yes. You have an interjection.
Sorry. Someone asked how much of the taking of Crimea was about maintaining the naval base at Sevastopol, which the lease was about to expire. That's a very fair question. I think the Crimean case is a complicated one.
Responsible for.
Pardon?
I think there was some feedback.
Oh yes, the Crimean case is a very, I think, complicated one. On the one hand, that was a land grabbing, like taking part of neighbors' land, right? That's it. I mean, there is no excuse. On the other hand, as Pascal mentioned earlier, expansion of NATO eastwards for the last 20 years, perceived by Moscow as a threat. And once there was a pro-Western government in Ukraine, the Russian strategists thought that the next step would be losing those naval bases in Crimea, and in a peninsula where 80% of the population are ethnically Russian, and in a peninsula which was given to Ukraine within the Soviet context in the 1950s. Before that, Crimea was part of the Russian Federation. End of 1950s. So there are many, let's say, factors there. But I think the solution, if you ask me what will be the solution or what would be the solution to the overall situation here, the Americans will not give the guarantee to Russia of Ukraine not being accepted as a member to NATO. There won't be a written guarantee. They refuse to give it, and they will not give it. And actually, Moscow probably predicted that Americans would refuse that. That would be impossible to expect from Washington to agree to a clause like this, like we will not let Ukraine for foreseeable future. That's a great power do not sign up to those kind of commitments, big commitments like this, unless they're in a very desperate situation, right? And I'm sure strategists in Moscow foreseen this. They knew that Americans would refuse that. That was the highest, let's say, order they would ask for, the highest thing, that biggest thing they would ask. They aim 12 in order to target 10 or 9. So they actually, by being part of these negotiations, they prove that they are part of the European security structure, and they cannot be omitted. They cannot be seen as nobody in the room. They are now. They push the Western capitals to be accepted as a stakeholder or as a partner within the European security system. You need to negotiate with Russia before you make new arrangements in European security structure. Right? That's the thing they wanted to aim, and that's what they got it. On the other hand, probably there will be some positive results in terms of arms controls, where military maneuvers, military exercises. There will be some agreements on that. In Ukrainian case, in Ukrainian case, the ideal solution is, to my mind, do you hear me, by the way? Is there a technical issue, or is it okay? The ideal solution, there's no ideal solution, but let's say optimal solution, right? Would be reorganize the referendum in the Crimea, where the international observers are also allowed to come and observe. And although the outcome will be most probably obvious, more than 50% will prefer to stay within the Russian Federation, but it will endorse and give an international legitimacy to Russia to keep the peninsula. That's probably maximum what Russia can say yes, unless they say that's a done deal, finished deal. We don't do anything in the Crimea. We won't step back. You cannot force us. That's it. This is a closed case, right? In the Crimean case, or as I said, there can be some rerun of the referendum with international observers. This in Donbass and Lugansk, in these territories, and a kind of a cultural autonomy can be on the table, and that was what Minsk II, the second round of Minsk agreement was. There was a clause like this in the agreement, ceasefire agreement, that there would be kind of a cultural, or I don't know, administrative autonomy there. That autonomy can be established, and which would for now, which would guarantee peace. About Ukrainian membership to NATO, there could be a tacit agreement on that, but more importantly, because what Russian experts says, it's not only about Ukraine entering NATO, but it's also NATO entering Ukraine. So in de jure, in juridical terms, Ukraine might not be a member of NATO, But if NATO troops or if NATO military equipment is deployed in Ukraine, then the result will be the same. So for us, they say the end result will be the same anyway. Huh? So perhaps Ukraine, will not be accepted. At least it will not. Nobody said that it will accept it anyway, especially with territorial disputes and so on. But if not, so the case is not Ukraine entering NATO, but NATO entering Ukraine. We don't want that as well. So there, the discussion point is, can we have neutral territory like Austria after the Second World War, or Finland after the Second World War? Because there are cases like this, as a no man's land in that sense. That's of course depend on the negotiators, Russian and American negotiation teams. I suspect Moscow would be happy with that eventually, but if Americans would be happy with that or not, or if Ukrainian government would find themselves, government officials would find themselves in a secure position with that solution, I don't know.
Well, we are at a long time, guys. We're at 2. Jason was like, let's not go for 3 hours because it takes me ages to upload the video, upload the audio. But now he's got a big, juicy audio to upload.
Big, thick, girthy audio file
a big, thick, girthy audio file.
I have a couple of announcements. I'd like to say, people, if you want to watch Beyond the Racial Wealth Gap on Diet Soap with me and Doug Lane, check it out. Also, please go check out the interview we did for the Real News Network with Chris Hedges. Also, check out the first one we've done with Adolph Reed. Please like, subscribe, and become a patron to help us grow, and look for our work on the Real News Network with This Is Revolution podcast.
And don't forget to follow Marcus as well if you guys are Twitch users on Left Flank Vets. Also, Marcus will be joining me and a cast of others on the new sports show we have called Beyond the Red Zone. The first episode is already up, where we discuss the NFC Championship and how I feel about protests in sports and so much more.
Shout out to my host and my partner here, Jason Miles, is going to be on a special show on Monday for 5 hours, I understand.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to be there for 5 hours. I don't have that much to say.
5 hours of Jason. Usually only very special ladies get 5 hours of Jason.
Whoa. TMI.
And now you guys know the real reason why I disappear from the screen. No, it's really
What's the name of the show you're going to be on, Jason?
I'll be on the David Feldman show. So shout out to Rodrigo and M. Toussaint for telling me to go on this thing David Feldman does. It's really cool, actually, called Office Hours. And they introduced me, and he asked me a couple questions, and like my answer is like, I want you on Monday. So, I mean, you can join me as well, Pascal, because
oh, really? Word? I'm invited to the party?
Yeah, no, he didn't want to just talk to me. He knows that there's another black guy.
Cool.
It is Black History Month. You can't,
Yeah, I told him, I said, it's perfect timing. It's February. It's Black History Month. You can have your diversity and improve, black person.
Equity. You are a diversity. Are you
between crumpets?
No, he's a regular white guy. He doesn't eat crumpets.
Crumpets are nice. I've been, Zal has discovered crumpets since he came to England, and he now goes around the kitchen going, crumpet, crumpet.
Tells all don't go to school in America calling cookies biscuits because the kids will beat him up.
Yeah.
Hey, what you talking about? That ain't a biscuit. That's a cookie.
My mama makes biscuits look like that. Them cookies. You're the weirdest foreign Mexican I've ever seen, Zal.
It's honestly surprising how good Gene is at doing the Missouri Southern accent. I've
been in Southwest Missouri for like 5 years now.
But Haroon, we'll just say thank you so much for dropping, I feel like, 3 volumes of European history in the, for Kazakhstan and Ukraine and Russia. So thank you so
He's not
much.
Dr. Haroon for nothing.
Yeah, which I like. We don't have the time, but I feel like there's an
appreciate a
issue
lot
with
your
I just said I'm concerned with the amount of like just military hardware the U.S. is going to try and dump into Europe before they're willing to, actually like try and relax any of these things. But we'll see how that goes.
Thank you guys.
Anything
for
exciting going on with
watching.
you, Haroon? Any live performances where people can go and see the Haroon?
In his classroom?
Go see
I
the
think I
Haroon,
cannot
go
beat-
see the
I cannot beat
Haroon.
your performance here at all. I cannot
Well, Haroon's
surpass
lifting
this.
weights. He's lifting weights in them London gyms. He's walking
Yeah,
in
that's
there.
right.
It's getting huge.
Talking about.
Go see the Haroon, go see the Haroon.
Lift. I'm about
Exactly,
to
my
lift.
alter ego, the heavyweight lifter. Exactly. My alter ego must be very busy on the internet. I can imagine.
You gotta love
Deadlifted
those videos.
40 stone.
Well,
That's a
you know,
KGB
the
operation,
funny-
guys. That's a KGB operation to diminish my reputation. They put those pictures there.
It's the deep state. It's the deep state coming for you, Kuba. Well, you think it's bad for Haroon? You know what my boss's name is? Kathleen Kennedy. Can you imagine how many angry emails she gets, like by accident? I just couldn't imagine that. I was like, all the nerds. I'm like, oh my God, Kathleen, that's so unfortunate for you, because all the nerds are angry at Kathleen Kennedy.
Yeah.
Ooh,
that sucks.
that is a. I'm
That's like that guy named Matt, like some journalist named Matt Gertz.
Oh yeah, Matt Gaetz. He always gets Matt Gaetz things.
Yeah.
That sucks. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Haroon, once again for coming on.
Thank you.
Chat. Thank you guys for engaging. I heard that there was a bit of a spiciness in the chat between anarchists and trots. You know what I always say. Actually, I don't always say it. I'm making it up now. So I'm always going to say it from here on out. It's good to know a little bit of history, but when you spend way too much time in the past, you are not focused on what's going on in the present. Ooh, that was good. That was
Ooh,
pretty
that's
good.
an aphorism.
I fucking
Oh,
freestyled that. Fucking freestyled that.
you eating those tasty edibles? Oh,
No, I don't.
Wait.
Did you see that? Did you see my
We should do a survey of our patrons, because I think you could do surveys on Patreon to see
Mhm.
who's an anarchist, who's a trot, and who's an ML.
no, we don't want to know that.
I don't want to know. I don't
Don't
want to
wanna
know
know
what
either.
you are. I don't want to know any preferences you have. I
People
just
want to know what tags you're wearing. We've got the
Yeah.
Crips, the
Oh,
Bloods.
What
dude,
set you
I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit. Cops pulled me over one time. You know what they didn't ask me? Political affiliation.
Whether you were a trot.
Yep. Did not give a shit. Did not give a
Well,
shit.
Fair enough.
And on that
We
note,
love all left.
That's why
Yeah.
ACAB.
We love ML. We love trot. Jason likes furries.
Stop. Did you say furries?
It's an important
Did you say
political.
furries?
It's
Yeah,
important political
supporters of
base.
Grover Fur.
Grover Fur. From now on, you're not a Stalinist. You're a furry. You're a Grover furry.
Yeah, but
Just deal with it. That's what you are, and that's what I'm going to call you. Oh, there's furries in the chat. That's what I'm saying.
Did
Haroon.
you get like a really bad message one time when someone says, "I really didn't appreciate you guys making fun of like alternative, creative, sexual lifestyles"? That was really kind
hey,
of.
we're not making fun of furries. We're making fun of people who
Of-
read Grover Fur.
Grover furries. It's very different.
Grover. Very
No,
different.
someone got serious. They're like, you don't understand the furry lifestyle. I was like, look, sorry.
Don't want to understand it.
I'm just saying.
It's fine.
Whatever you
I had
do.
a
is
guy
totally
in the
cool.
I had a guy in the Warhammer shop explain it to me. He was very sad. He said, if I was gay, I could find someone to yiff with just in one night. And he said, but I can't find any female yiffers. And I was like, I don't know what yiffing is.
And please don't try to explain it now.
I can show you way better than I could tell you.
Yeah, no.
All right, we gotta fucking go, man. We've been talking too long. This is insane.
Say goodbye, guys.
Are you all right? Is everyone ready to hear a wonderful little song I made for my child while watching the cartoons of my childhood? Enjoy.